The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to attack. With the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. Here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, you'll find youth and high school coaching tips for coaches, parents, and wrestlers, featuring Gable-trained NCAA champion and Hall of Fame high school coach Daryl Weber. Find out more on attackstylewrestling.com. Now, on to the show. And welcome back, episode 34 of the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. Jason Bryant returning with you with NCAA champion, Hall of Fame coach, and pretty good all-around good guy, Daryl Weber. Daryl, been a while. We're back on the horse. We're pitching out some wrestling content for people to consume.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to get back. It's been, I think, over a year since we did one of these. And I travel around, do clinics and from time to time, and I just about every time I go somewhere, somebody always asks me, "Hey, when are you going to do those podcasts?" I didn't know people really listen to them, so I got excited to get it fired back up and start talking some more wrestling.
And before we get into today's topic, which is about training for the postseason, what's new and what's popping on attackstylewrestling.com?
Actually, we've got a lot of cool stuff happening on Attack Style Wrestling. I've been listening to our customers, and we've got our standards of learning. We've upgraded that platform, basically where I've taken all my techniques, all my drills, all my setups, all the instructional videos, and put those into a rank style practice system. So there's several tiers, and there's about 15, 16, 17 practices per tier. So it tells you exactly where to start, how to progress. And like I said, we upgraded our members area so that we're building out more, so it's more user friendly. And we have a big project planned for next year that I can't really talk about, but I think it's going to be very unique to the wrestling community. So we're working on that behind the scenes, and pretty excited about what we have in the future.
The focus on today's show is preparing for the postseason. We're probably going to give this more for high school, but if you have anything you want to interject about college, I'm sure Daryl knows a little bit about that, being an NCAA champion and all. He's kind of also the pride of Gilbertville, Iowa. Trivia question, you are still the only NCAA champion Division I champion from Gilbertville, Don Bosco.
That is true. So there's a lot of great wrestlers come out of there. Great tradition. But yeah. Luckily,
can't have a conversation with Mac Ryder without mentioning Daryl Weber.
Don't do that to him.
Now, as we look at the type of calendar, so as we record this, it's mid-January. It's late January. We're approaching the postseason. You've gone through your Christmas tournaments. You've come off events like the Virginia Duels, Escape the Rock, the Clash, things of that nature, Temecula Valley, Five Counties, all these big events that go on nationwide, or even just your local tournaments. You've gotten the pound allowance in some cases. You've got your certification weight. You might have a bump or bruise here and there. So from a coaching perspective and from an athlete perspective, there's two ways we're going here. First, how do you evaluate talent as a coach based on what you've seen as we're in the new year? We know the postseason's 4 or 5 weeks away in some cases, and you've got to make some adjustments. Is it lineup changes? Is it weight management? What are some things as a coach you look for at this point in the year as you head, 4 or 5 weeks away from actually starting that state qualification run?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always looked at it as there's kind of 3 phases, 3 parts of the wrestling season. There's kind of pre-Christmas or pre-New Year's, and then you have kind of that stretch from the time you come back from Christmas break into your postseason stuff. And then you have postseason. And, to me, how coaches handle these and what they do in each of those phases really takes a coach or a program or a wrestler from good to great. You see a lot of good coaches. They always have good numbers. They're always respectable. But those great ones are the ones that every year you're like, how do they do that? How do they overperform in the postseason all the time? And those are few and far between, I believe. Those people that can do that consistently. You see a lot of times a lot of coaches, and sometimes regularly, they burn their guys out at the end of the season, and you don't want that. So with all that in mind, what I always looked for in the beginning of the year, you kind of come into the season and you'll start the season and you have this kind of map. You kind of plan out a couple weeks of practices. Okay, we're going to get the basics down, the fundamentals down. But once you start hitting competitions, my belief is everything's got to change. You got to do a good job of evaluating your competition. What do you need to work on? And every week you're planning practices fresh and focusing on, what the individuals need to focus on. So you're doing that at the beginning. And typically, a lot of people are hitting up big tournaments, first of the year through Christmas. And then you go into Christmas. And I've always seen that as a good time when they're out of school to really get some great training in, and kind of really, that's where we always got in college and with my high school teams, that's where you really kind of juiced up the conditioning, and that's where you really got the bulk of your conditioning and your training in. So you kind of come out of that, and at the beginning of the season, you might be experimenting with things technically with your team, maybe trying different series or techniques, but you got to evaluate those things pretty quick and see if they're working. I can remember many a times, beginning of the year, everybody's struggling. Even though, we had a bunch of great wrestlers and won a lot of state titles, you're always struggling on the bottom, especially with your new guys, your less experienced guys. So you might try some new series from the bottom position. And many times after the first of the year, I scrapped a bunch of stuff I was messing with, and we went back to the basics and just hounded on those things the rest of the year. So I think you got to look at your performance, look where your team's at, and you got to start to really dial in on technically and kind of situationally. You got to make sure they're good at the fundamentals. They got to be able to get out from the bottom. They got to be able to clear legs. They got to have a good stance. They got to have good sprawls and leg and shot defense. As a team, they got to have certain things, and you got to make sure if they don't have that, you got to start getting drills and techniques and figuring that stuff out. And then you got to start figuring out your individual's strengths. What's this guy's best setup to take down? He's not going to have every single setup, every single shot, both legs typically. So you got to start zeroing in on what they're good at. What's their best turn? You might teach the whole team several turn series, but this guy's going to get real good at chicken wings, and this guy's got a really good half. This guy's got cradles. So you really start to dial in, and kind of the experimenting and learning is over. It's time to get really solid with your fundamentals and figure out where each individual is the strongest. And sometimes as you get closer to the postseason, with that in mind, sometimes a big part of it is eliminating weaknesses, telling this guy, listen, don't do this anymore. Don't push yourself in this situation. Just eliminating those mistakes. Don't throw legs anymore. If ever some kid wants to get good at legs, and every time he throws them, he gets reversed to his back. No more. We're not playing around with this anymore. We'll work on it in the off season, but we're done with this right now. So yeah, that's kind of that's kind of the mindset. After the first of the year.
So you'd mentioned something about burning out, and then your conditioning over the Christmas break. So there's that line. Some coaches believe that you amp it up towards the end of the year, so you're in good shape. But what it sounds like is your perspective is, okay, you amp it up without that competition in those practice areas during those times where you're not competing. And then is it more of a tapering from an athlete perspective when you're training these kids to go into the postseason healthy? Because we talk about it on the college level all the time. When you go into the NCAA championships, there's 330 wrestlers at the Division I level. They're all hurt. They all have a bump or a bruise. Nobody's 100% healthy. The high school level, you don't deal with that as much, but you still have little nagging injuries, whether it be a soft ankle or a sore shoulder. So in terms of gearing that practice up to taper down the intensity in terms of making sure your body's healthy, but making sure your conditioning stays there and you're able to perform at a high level. What is that balance, and how does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so I don't think you taper down the intensity. You shorten it up. So the practices might get a little bit shorter. Practice might be 2.5 hours beginning of the year. And then afterwards, number one, typically you get into more competition. Most teams have more duels during the week, and they have tournaments on the weekend. So there's less training days after New Year's a lot of times. So you might only have one or two hard practices throughout the week during after the New Year. So I think you just don't want to. Like I said, the intensity doesn't go away. It's just maybe shorter goes. shorter bursts, and maybe you only have one really killer workout throughout the week, and the rest of it is, you put a little strength training, you got feel good, maybe it's a bunch of drills. You got to kind of figure that stuff out, but you're definitely right. There's a tapering effect. And two things, I kind of put this at the end of our show notes, but I'll mention it right now. So two things. Number one, especially as you get into the postseason, this was how I kind of started making decisions after I had some more and more coaching experience, was if I was teetering between, hey, should I kill him today? Should we go super hard? Should I blow him out? Or maybe I shouldn't. If I was in a dilemma, I always chose the easier path towards the end of the year. Because I didn't want them. No, to go on to the second point, I didn't want them. The last thing you want is your kids to want the season over with. That last 2 to 4 weeks of the season, you want them fresh. You want them surprise them by coming in, and they think there's going to be a ball buster practice at the end of the season, and maybe you come in and say, okay, we're going to warm up, and you're going to do 50 shots with your partner, 20 escapes and reversals, your favorite turn 20 times, and then you're out of here. Something like that. You do something like that to a team that's kind of getting wore out, man, they're energized, they're fired up, kind of like, and because the benefits don't outweigh the downside at that point. We got to get them tougher, we got to get them in shape. If you're in that position, then it might be too late. So yeah, definitely want to have that tapering mind, but you don't want to the intensity. You don't want the intensity to vanish for like the last month. It's got to be there. Even as one day you say, okay, one day I'm just going to warm them up, but we're going to go hard goes. And another thing, maybe it's not live, depending on your team. Maybe you got a bunch of young guys. Maybe you don't have many guys on your team, so you can't afford injuries. So maybe you got to get creative with drills. You can use just drills, more controlled situations, and get teams in unbelievable shape and get them scoring more points a lot of times because they're not just standing around with each other doing live wrestling. So the intensity's got to be there, but I think you got to get creative. You got to maybe shorten it up. Practice get a little bit shorter. You come in and you get after it, and just the fact that practices were 2.5 hours in December, going into January, and then they're a little bit shorter. That could keep a team fresh. If they're getting out a little bit, if they're only an hour and a half long, and you're not murder them every single day. The number one goal is you want them fired up at the end of the season.
How much has the wrestling mindset of coaches changed over the years to go, even 25 years ago when I'm in high school? Geez, that sounds like a long time ago, because it was. We're the 3-hour practice was it. All right, 3:15, and that was almost like the baseline. You had to have a 3-hour practice, or you weren't working hard enough. How much has that evolved and changed over the years since you've come and gone in the high school coaching ranks?
That's what we did in Don Bosco. You had, especially at the beginning of the year, you had 3-hour practices. I went, and I don't remember we ever having a 3-hour practice at Iowa. We get in there, got after it. So that kind of blew that 3-hour practice out of the water for me. And then I went, I started coaching with Kevin Dresser, and he been coaching high school for a while, and obviously came from Iowa too. And yeah, that mentality was really never there when I was there, because you understood you got to keep these kids fresh. You're only going to get so much out of them for so long, and after, it's just a point of diminishing returns after a little while. And I would rather see some kids come in with high intensity, get after it, sharp, focused during the technique, actually learning, than coming in and say, it's a 3-hour practice, and just kind of going through the motions. I like to see focus, and I like to see intensity more than, and you're going to get more, they're going to get in better shape, and they're going to get better too by doing that.
One thing you talked about the situational workouts, and in my experiences at the Olympic Training Center, this is something that even happens at the elite levels in freestyle. And granted, it's a different style, but how much situational work and positional work? Okay, we're going to start this drill. You're on the edge. You're defending a double with 5 seconds or 10 seconds left on the clock. How much of those situations really help with the mental aspect of an athlete, knowing how to win late, knowing how to, develop their skills and know how their body works in those high pressure situations that can help them, one, win more matches and in turn be more confident in those positions. So they, win more matches.
No, you're exactly right. Those are game changers. People that know how to use situational live wrestling in practice are the best coaches I see. And you touched on both of them. They're excellent for learning how to win matches, win positions, and they're excellent on learning how to execute techniques. I mean, because a lot of times you can drill and you can teach technique until you're blue in the face, but they just don't do it in matches. And there's some things that you might try to teach your teams and they don't do them in matches. Like, well, maybe they're not ready for that. Maybe they don't have the skill set, they need to do this. But there's some things they got to be able to do. And like there was a couple situations situations that I always got the best results from not necessarily it was a combination of teaching and live situational. So you would show the technique, they'd practice it, drill with each other, then you'd put them in there and they go live, and then you'd have to stop and show technique some more. Hey, we're not doing this. You guys aren't. And one of them was leg defense. Leg defense, my guys would get so much better when we do that because you would show them a technique, how to maybe swim out of it, or I call it hip bounce, all kinds of different techniques in there. And they could drill it fine, but when a guy was really leeching on, they couldn't do it. Well, then you had to stop and say, listen, everybody's, messing this up, can't get this done because nobody's, doing this. And then you drill a little bit and you go back out there and go live again. And there's certain positions where they actually absorb it and can take those techniques to live match skills much faster by using situational wrestling. And then, like you said, they got to have a game plan in certain situations in tough matches, like short time situations as well.
I'm going to use an example that both of us know really well in terms of this, and this is the other side of the coin. So we've mentioned his name a couple times in previous episodes, but B.J. Compton was a 4-time state champ at Christiansburg. Wicked cradle on top. Now, his opponent, we mentioned this match a lot, Anthony Burke, who was from my high school in Pocosin. Well, they knew BJ had a really, really tough cradle, one of the best in the state, if not, in the state's history. So what do? They bring in a specialist, a long, lanky guy, really good at cradles. So the opposite side of that coin is, okay, you're teaching your athletes how to win in these situations or perform in these situations and beat these situations. What about the other side? When you've got a wrestler now, you've got to teach somebody that's gearing up to defend what they know is coming. How do you teach your offensive athlete to basically, what's coming and still do it in those positional situations? Because cradle defense really didn't help Anthony that match.
Now you're asking how to get the defensive guy better?
No, the offensive guy that knows the defensive guy has been training for what the offensive guy is good at. How to basically go, you know what, you're going to try to stop this. I'm still going to make you do it.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to know the common counters. And that's why it's so important to teach, especially top, really any series, but top series, not holds, but series. So, if he's really good at throwing that cradle, you got to know the number one counter, and there's a series built around it. So you always want to get it the easiest way. So, you want to just slap that cradle on, pull him back, and pin him. Well, let's say you slap the cradle on and he drops real low and you can't pull him back. Well, then you got to be able to drive the hip down, load him on your. There's this chain wrestling thing that you got to teach your guys, and then even if they know the other person's been working on the defense, they still got to stick with their best stuff. They just got to be confident that their best stuff can dominate their opponents. But yeah, that's why it's so important to have to kind of look ahead and know what the other person's going to do and counter that. And there's a lot of times that, and this is really important in peaking, especially if you saw somebody at the beginning of the year, you're going to see him again. Maybe you're going to wrestle him 3 or 4 times by the end of the postseason. You got to have little ways to stay ahead of their defenses too. So maybe you always go to an ankle and chop and run somebody down and run your half or something on the whistle. You're really good at that, but you're wrestling this guy all the time. Well, maybe we do a chop off the whistle next time. Or maybe we switch sides and do an outside ankle. You got to stay ahead of the game. And we would, at Christiansburg, we would always have a baseline knowledge of turn series. But we would get really good and really sink our teeth into, 1 or 2 for a couple of years. then I would kind of, you'd always work on that one, but then I would really focus on another one because everybody would start to figure, good teams are going to figure you out. You always had your halves and your cradles and stuff, but, maybe we do a cross wrist tilt for a couple of years and you kill people with it. Well, then you start to see people getting better at the defense and you change it up and you start doing chicken wing tilts or, something like that. Or you start doing near wrist series. And you change. They're always learning this stuff, but you really focus on it in practice a little bit more.
One thing as you go through the end of the season, weight management is something that is key, and kids are growing. Of course, that's why a lot of states have the growth allowance. Now, when strength training through this, that is kind of like that chicken or the egg or that damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario. You don't want to lift too much to get too big to grow yourself out of a weight class, but you also want to maintain your strength. So you're a guy that was big on the weight room. And what are some things that you learned that kind of make sure you can strength train through the season while not burning your body out and still maintaining your strength and not getting too big and outgrowing a weight class?
Yeah, to put muscle on like you're talking about and grow out of a weight class takes extreme discipline. Like you got to, if you were like really skinny or you've ever tried to put muscle on because you're trying to go, it's hard.
Daryl never been really skinny, so this example's lost on me.
Well, if you've ever tried to bulk up, it's hard. Like,
again, just not the best example.
It all comes down to nutrition. So the whole theory that you can't lift during the season because you won't be able to make weight, just throw that out the window. That's been proven wrong decades and decades ago. So the thought process, though, some coaches still have that in their thought process. Like it doesn't, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that there's still a lot of bad adages that still permeate wrestling coaching systems, throughout the planet, essentially. Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, you better start to read some books or talk to some educated people in the strength training field because you're getting passed up by people that know what's going on. But I found with high school teams, when I was in college or even in high school, I was dedicated enough and driven enough where I would go in before school and lift weights and then go to practice in the afternoon. And then obviously in college, you got, you're working with coaches in the morning and going to practice. But what I found for the masses as a high school coach, to try during the season to have your team come in and lift weights in the morning and then go to school all day, no naps or anything, and then practice, hard in the afternoon, you're going to fry them. There's going to be driven kids that will do that. Kids that go on a D1, stuff like that. You just hard-nosed kids that can, they're just driven and they want to do it. So they'll get up a couple times a week in the morning and do it on their own. But I think if you ask a whole team to do that, it might backfire on you. So I always tried to incorporate my strength training into practice. And what I like to do was have one day where we would go, it was always at the end of practice. And one day, and some people like to do it at the beginning of practice. There's science behind, like a dynamic movement, dynamic lifting before a workout, in practice can help you practice better. So there's science behind that. Some people like to do it. I always like to just take them in at the end of practice, and I would have early in the week, I would have a heavier lift. And then later in the week, I would have just a circuit in the wrestling room. I'd set up a bunch of stations and kettlebells and jumps and push-ups, body weight stuff. And we would set up a circuit. And I feel it's very important. So when I was in college, I realized, I figured this out on my own. We would get unbelievable. You would come in when school started in college and, you'd be doing these morning lifts and you just get in incredible shape, but it's boom, boom, you're just going. And then you'd be in incredible shape. Season would start, you get your weight under control. And about Christmas time or after the first of the year, I had no explosion or pop. I would just train my body just to grind this circuit type of lifting. And then, so what I started to do after I kind of figured this out is I would just go in after practice and pick one kind of compound exercise and just do a couple sets, but heavy. And you can just feel your nervous system kind of gets that explosion back in it. And so I always tried to keep that with our teams. So early in the week, maybe Monday or Tuesday, depending on if we had competition in the week, I would always, after practice, we would go in, and depending on what your weight room looks like, you might do a deadlift, you might do a squat, you might do, kind of a bigger lift. And you don't want to load it completely up, get up to about the 75, 80% range of their max, and, getting a couple sets of like 3 reps in, and then do some auxiliary lifting. But to get them moving that heavy weight keeps that explosion in the middle of the season and keeps that pop. You don't want them losing that.
There's a strength element to wrestling, and we've talked about confidence a little bit as well. And that confidence boils down not just to success on the mat, but also the mental training aspect. I mean, there are kids when you're getting 15, 16, 17-year-old athletes who, they're going to the show for the first time. They're scared. They're going to see the lights. They're going to hear Winnabow peeing for the first time at maybe a state wrestling tournament. How do you deal with, college athletes? You're there for, it's a different level. You're dealing with kids that are still emotional. They're learning how their body reacts to things, how their mind reacts to things. What are some mental exercises that you have found that are successful for kids of this age group that really kind of help them focus on understanding how winning and losing works with their ability and how they get better or, learn from it?
Yeah. So this is what makes a difference right here, is training the mind. Everybody knows technique, and, some people run a practice, but even the running practice, there's always got to be this element of building confidence and building your mind in everything you do. So, this is a 2-part answer. There's one thing I want to talk about that focuses on building confidence. And there's another one where it's kind of controlling your mind so you can compete at your optimal level. So let's talk about building confidence first. So I always had, kind of like some standard workouts I would do throughout the year. So let me give you an example. We had this big loop that you could run in the hallways at our school. And so once a week, and I would map this out at the beginning of the year and plan this for peaking purposes. But once a week, on the day that I really wanted to get after them, typically it was a Tuesday, because Mondays are usually foggy and from the weekend still. Tuesdays were always my best days if we had a whole week of training. So at the end of practice, we would go up, and at the beginning of the year, we would do laps, and it was always, maybe you do some warm-ups, but then at the beginning of the year, they're longer. Maybe it's 3 or 4 laps at a time. Okay. And then as the season, and you might do that 3 times or something. So they get a total of 12 laps and something to that effect. They're longer periods. And then as the season progresses, they get shorter periods, higher intensity. And what I do with those is that you're always talking, about kind of competing, and pushing themselves. And they knew though they were going to be hard. There was kids that would, be puking sometimes at the end of those and pushing themselves so hard. And some of them couldn't push themselves that hard. And you talked about that. But you talked about having a poker face and never show, when they got done with the laps, they're not like flailing around like they're going to die. I don't care if you're tired. Don't show it on your face. Things like that, building that mind. So if you keep doing that and then, for training purposes and conditioning and intensity and peaking, you're kind of shortening the periods, and maybe at the end of the year, you just go up there and they're all warmed up. They're, end of practice. Maybe you say, hey, we're going to do 2-1 laps, but I want to see who's going to get after it, and they're fired up and they explode. So throughout the year, you got your guys that maybe are new to wrestling, and they're walking at the end of the sprints, at the beginning of the year. And then as the year progresses, they're getting in better shape, and they're passing some guy, and the coach isn't yelling at him anymore. And so they're building that confidence through this, just this one exercise, but we do it. It's kind of a standard, so they can kind of compare themselves, weekly on this. And you have to engineer success sometimes too with some kids. So, maybe you give, maybe some kid, maybe he's a heavyweight and he's never wrestled before, and he ends up getting lapped every single time. Well, maybe you give him a head start for 3/4 of a lap. Then you have everybody go. You set it up so he's going to win by a little bit. You kind of figure it out in your head as a coach. Well, and he sprints harder than he ever has, but it's only for 1/4 of a lap, and he wins it. Well, that builds a little confidence, just little things like that. I like to use that type of workout. And then we would always, after the sprints, we would go down and we did what we called a wall walk. So they just got done doing all their sprints and they're tired. And so you got 4 walls in a wrestling room. They had to get on their hands so their face was facing the wall and their feet are propped against the wall. So they're on their hands and they got to shuffle on their hands around the room. Now, the general rule is if you fall down, in the one wall, everybody kind of sat and cheered and all their bags and stuff were on. So this is a U. So they had 3 walls they had to do. If you're a veteran wrestler, you've been around a while, well, if you fall down, you got to start over from the beginning. And some kids can do it. Some kids get almost all the way through. But eventually they get it. And if you're brand new, well, you got to make one wall. If you fall down, you got to go to the beginning of that one wall. So you engineer that success. And then throughout the year, those new kids that couldn't hardly make it one wall, well, they're making 2 walls. Some of them are making all the way around. And I've seen so many kids just build so much confidence in workouts like that. Just like with little measuring sticks, weekly measuring sticks that are always the same. So, you got to look at your facilities, come up with something that's safe. You don't want to, I wouldn't take them in there and tell them that their squat max has to go up every week. That's a good way to get hurt, but find something that's going to build that conditioning and you can use it to build that mind at the same time. And you're always talking. We don't just go up there and say, run 3 laps and I go sit down and read a book. I'm on, even my best guys, my 3-time state champ, maybe he's dogging it and he's getting passed by somebody. I'm on his tail. I'm not letting him slack. So those are great ways to build confidence. Because sometimes you can't build confidence if you're a new wrestler in live wrestling. You just get your tail whooped all the time. But you can go up there and you can kind of battle yourself and win those battles. And then to work on how to kind of control your emotions, we would do drills, especially towards the end of the year. At the end of practice, we turn lights off and kind of walk them through visualization stuff, little techniques that they could use between big matches rather than sit up the stands and watch their competitors go or run around, teach them how to get away from it all, go in a locker room, play cards with their buddies, or do a visualization technique to kind of relax and not get too anxious and too wore out between matches, and then drills before your match on how to kind of visualize and get rid of negative energy, stuff like that. So you have how to control your mind so you can compete at your optimal level and you don't have a bunch of negative thoughts out there. And then you got techniques throughout the year to build that confidence.
So much of winning matches isn't about technique. There's the mental aspect of it. And what I just heard you talk about was goal setting, whether it be the 1 wall, the 2 wall, the 3 walls. How does a goal setting type of practice or a technique really help someone understand how to win a match? Because, winning matches when you're good is one thing. Winning matches that are tough, that you've had to fight through, and then it wasn't, your body didn't have anything left, but you willed your body to get that last takedown or get that takedown in sudden victory to basically will yourself to win. How much do those go hand in hand with the goal setting techniques and then understanding and teaching someone how to win so they're used to it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to goal setting. You got, your long-term goals, which are important. And the long-term goals, those should be your long-term goals should be the type that when you tell people, they think you're crazy, and then you have your kind of midterm, but the really important ones I feel are your daily goals. And we would talk about that a lot in practice and talk about, my goal was always to get the kids excited to stay after practice every day or several days a week and just put in 5 minutes. And I would talk about this hey, if you suck on your feet, let's stay after 5 minutes with your buddy and hit 20 single legs or whatever. At the end of the season, that's going to add up. Things like that, your daily routine. Hey, when we warm up, don't just go through the motions, warm up harder than your buddy. And when you do sprints, beat that guy every single day. Try to close the gap. Even if you get your tail whooped in practice, try to close the gap. You got beat by 10 points yesterday by this guy, get beat by 9 tomorrow. That's success. So, I call it the progress wheel, spinning the progress wheel. So you got to be able to, put the work in, test yourself, evaluate yourself, and then get to work. and then it starts all over. Put the work in, test yourself. Well, let's say you did that and the only time you were really serious about it was competition. Well, I'm going to test myself with the competition. That's when I really was worried about competing and measuring myself. Well, you're going to spin that progress wheel every week. But what if you got to a point where winning every sprint was competitive to you, and winning every takedown was competitive to you, and warming up harder than your buddy was competitive? Well, then you're freaking spinning that wheel so fast. It's all kinds of progress going on. So I got them to try to understand that. And I think, like we said, goals, you have your crazy long-term goals, and then you got those daily goals that really, and that's how you truly build confidence over time, is just by always kind of measuring yourself and get a little bit better every single day, working to get a little bit better every single day. And pretty soon, I call it the HSE effect, or the HSE. It's called the holy shit effect. You want to somebody doesn't see you for a couple months, compete, and then they see you. You want them to go, holy shit, what was he doing? So that's what you want. That comes from just having a positive, competitive mind frame every single day in as many situations as you can.
As we boil it down, we get to the postseason. And again, the state series is various places are different. Sometimes you have to be top 4. Sometimes you can sneak in if you have a bad weekend. Sometimes you have to win your last match to get in. I know some districts in sections in Iowa, they're notorious for being like, well, we take 2 and we got 3 hammers at this weight class. So those preparations and practice and all that mental warfare, so to speak, all plays a role. But when it all boils down to, what is Daryl Weber's golden rule of postseason training?
Well, the golden rule that I referred to in our outline is that when you're a coach and you're trying to set your schedule and things, it's like I talked about when you're figuring and you're peaking towards the end of the year. It's kind of like when I'm having a dilemma, go with the easier workout sometimes at the end of the year. Because you've already put the work in. Keep them fresh. And you're talking about the pressure of postseason, and that's wrestling. That's why people admire those guys that perform above their head at the end of the season, or the coaches that have teams that do that. Because if you know anything about wrestling, you know the pressure. You've got all the chips on the table at that point, and that's the coaches. Some kids have that. They grew up competitive or whatever. They kind of have more of it naturally. But you can build that. But that being able to perform at the end of the season when all the chips are on the table comes from doing it throughout the whole year and being used to it, and then being able to control your mind. Because even if you killed yourself, you've done everything right, you're still going to be, oh, my legs are tired before a match. Oh, maybe you're a little sick. You've got to be able to control that mind, and you got to be able to go out there and perform. So, to get guys that can perform under pressure, get them to understand how to relax, how to have that kind of calm confidence when they compete, and how to spin that progress wheel as fast as possible throughout the season. And that's really the key, And so you're always working on the mind throughout the whole year.
As we wrap up this episode talking about how to prepare for the postseason and work on your training and techniques throughout there, what's one piece of advice that you would give to coaches on how to properly assess the postseason and get things right and get your kids ready?
Yeah, so there's one kind of perspective I tried to put into my athletes, and it's first off, when you go out there and wrestle, you should only be worried about forcing your style on your opponent. Okay, there might be some scenarios where some competitor has, something really big move that you got to kind of know about. But your main concern is forcing your style on your opponent. And then when you get out there, the only thing you worry about, don't look at that score. Don't worry about anything but scoring the next point. If you can build the mindset where the only thing you're worried about, I'm neutral, I'm on bottom, I'm on top, doesn't matter. I'm just worried about scoring. How am I going to score the next point? It makes the sport fun. for the athlete because they're just kind of focused on wrestling. It makes it fun for the fans because there's more scoring points being scored. It's more exciting if somebody's out there just always scoring points, and it kind of takes all the other BS out of the equation. Hey, what's the score? How many points? Oh, geez, if I do this, I can hold on to this win. Just worry about scoring the next point all the time. You get taken. Maybe guy sneaks a takedown on the edge of the mat rather than walking back to the middle, shaking your head, pouting about it. Just worry about the next point. How are you going to score the next point? So that's a mindset that I really tried to get. And you could, if you get your kids believing that, you can adjust them in the middle of a match. You can see them falling apart maybe a little bit in a tough match and just look, hey, just score the next point. Just make eye contact when they go off the mat. Just score the next point. And they kind of shake it off and they get redialed. So just that perspective is huge, I believe.
Once again, training systems for any age, wrestle aggressive, build confidence, and tap full potential. AttackStyleWrestling.com. Daryl, great to be back with you here on the episode number 34. And for those of you listening and coaching your kids into the postseason, good luck this postseason, and let us know if any of these techniques worked for you. Daryl, final thoughts.
Oh, man, I appreciate it. It's great to be back on here. I love talking wrestling with you. Keep doing great things, Jason.
Show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.